Greetings and welcome to In Depth. I'm Dike Rostant. We are very happy to be in the space we're outside. We are at the Bois Academy of Trinidad and Tobago, and we're speaking with the pointer, Jamie Philbert, as well as the dreamer, Rondel Benjamin. We want to say thank you so much for making the time, because time is precious. But I want to start off with you, please, Jamie. Kalinda can be many things to many people. But if we say that Kalinda is a complex, how do you take that statement and explain it for us?
The easiest way to explain that statement is that Kalinda is martial dance. It is drumming or ancestral drumscapes. It is the live ways which are considered chants, prayers, laws, proverbs, also the rituals that we do inside of Kalinda and the stick fighting.
And that makes me feel that in terms of like having those almost like formalized elements, is that something that you'd add on to? Because I remember once you were talking about archiving and healing as well, I think, Benji?
Well, you know, let's look at the structure of the Gaia itself. One of the things that we recognize in the average Gaia is there's a way to enter and a way to exit. So right now, for example, we would slow down the pace and pay libations to King Congo Barra, who just walked, King David Matthew Brown, King Carl Swamba, Nolan Cummings, Mother Marian, who transitioned. Because Stokely. The first thing we do is we call into space the living ancestors with us. And then we use this living space to really yield ourselves to the foot of the drum, to hear each other's heartbeat, to engage with a different kind of listening. And if we enter space as sacred and we listen deeply, then automatically we could affect communication. And that's just a simple example of what we do every day, that when we go forward to look back, to remember what was and still is, then we could start gathering in our space these ancient technologies, reactivate them with our blood and our life, and really fall back into who we always were.
And there's something that you said in terms of yielding yourself to at the foot of the drum. And that kind of reminds me of Ayete Ngosi, I submit to my blessing. And I think sometimes we can say, okay, well, there is this sort of energy, there is this resource, so I want to use it. What would you say to someone who says, I want to use Kalinda?
I would first say to them that Kalinda cannot be used. She could only use you. I think that's not just the case for Kalinda, it's any of our ancestral gifts that we've been given. We have a habit as artists or as people who are searching for ourselves to want to use what the ancestors have given us, and they have left it so that it can be utilized. But it is not something that we approach in this way as if we're trying to get something from it because it has something to give to us. So if we open ourselves up in a space where we allow us to embody us, as King David Matthew Brown would say, to allow your DNA to unsurface, then it becomes a whole nother experience.
And in that experience, you spoke about martial dance. A martial tradition inside the space. How do we treat with that, Rondel? And I also want to add the follow-on. Can a martial tradition, can it be used, or can it be ensured like a martial art, or how do we treat with that in this space at this time?
So a lot of the terminologies they're using are infused with a Western perspective. You know, continental philosophy. Yeah, because that's what it is. And the ancient philosophy that bred thinking throughout the rest of the globe is the kind of thinking that does not place single emphasis on one aspect. So if I'm moving to a drum, I could be making love. If I'm moving to a drum, I could take care of my family. If I'm moving to a drum, I could make war, right? If I'm moving to a drum, I could take care of the cattle and the sheep and take care of the plants and the birds and the earth and the trees, right? That's if I move into the drum. So we look at a very classic Central African concept called Ubuntu. There's plenty of ways to look at it, and I don't consider myself an expert, but because I grew up inside a family that is very Kalinda-esque, right? I grew up in a space where all our way is one family. We are because I am, and I am because we are. Then the martial aspect of myself is the same as the loving aspect of myself. It's the same as the wise aspect of myself. It is an aspect, one of my faces. And when we face a world where, you know, there's conflict, and sometimes conflict requires us to bring force to space, nothing wrong with that. Just like sometimes conflict requires us to yield and give space, and nothing wrong with that either. And so what is a martial tradition, a martial combative, a martial art? In other places in the world, there are these hard delineations. But for our space, it's like breathing, it's like eating, it's like playing pitch, it's like playing bokeh, right? We could turn the game to science and the science to art. And then we could use these sciences and these arts for the betterment of the people. And if that is a definition for martial arts, I don't know what is.
And I really like the opportunity, I really like the scenario gave of there being a place for conflict. I remember the saying is only when breeze blow you see for boom see, you know. But also looking at the way that there's a distinction between a westernized sort of thinking versus continental sort of thinking. What are some of those challenges when we start to look at Kalinda? We try to offer ourselves a Kalinda, but in a very finite set of parameters for CSEC, or we want it for this module. We just want this. We don't want everything. We just want this.
I think that part of our challenge inside of Caribbean space is that we are modeling a lot of things after the Western world, at the same time doing our best to corral our own identity. When we look at the Western world of martial arts, all martial arts are looked at as a way of life. So when we get to the Caribbean, all of a sudden, no, it's not a way of life for some people, not for the people that are actually doing it and living that way of life. It becomes something that now can become a part of theater, a part of dance, and there's nothing wrong with that. Because again, if you look at the global world, martial arts do that. However, in those spaces, usually the people that are conducting martial arts for entertainment are actually martial artists. So, for example, simple thing. If I am a civilian and I go and I sit around a hospital all day long, around the hospital I see the nurses, I'm watching how the people bring in people on the gurney, I see the doctors, I get to stand up by the door and I'm watching the surgery. Does that mean now that I can be a doctor? You'll let me perform surgery on your Dike?
No, thank you.
Okay. So for me, I get confused sometimes as to why it is we can't see, and particularly with African forms, with this African martial tradition that exists inside of Trinidad, that is very much that. It has been pushed down since the 1800s. So we talk about it in this very mythology kind of way, and it's not real. Like it's just this magical thing that's happening in space and everyone can touch it. It's important for the children to learn about it. But if we have in an education system where you have not sat with the people who are practitioners of it, not just the researchers who are only able to look at it from the outside, even if they've been to Giles, even if they grew up inside of the villages that it was happening, yes, they will have a certain kind of information, but there's something different when you are on the inside of something.
And that is something that I want us to continue speaking about when we return. We are coming back in just a moment. Stay with us. We return with more.
When you on Carnival time, I see stickman at big stars. And after Carnival, I stickman like a bit like dog.
It's not because we like it, we had to get treated like dog. I didn't have to say it so, but we're getting treatment like dog.
Welcome back. We are speaking with Rondel Benjamin, the dreamer. We are speaking with Jamie Philbert, the pointer of the Bois Academy of Trinidad and Tobago. And just before we took the break, we were looking at, I almost want to say, kind of like practical in applications, also looking at the importance of insider knowledge. But just before we go back to that point, I think sometimes people only may think of Kalinda in the Gael. What are some of the ways that Kalinda can manifest outside of the physical Gael? You're not seeing drums, you're not seeing Bois, you're not seeing stick. I'll ask you that. Thanks, Rondel.
I want us to suspend for a second the perspective of interviewer and interview. I want to mash up a wall between us where you call and I respond, where we form circles and we interact with each other. Brown girl in the ring, tra la 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 la. Chantwell, response. You know brown girl in the ring was a laugh way. It's one of the ring games that was used to build competency for the guys. Let we talk about pitch, bokies, will. Let we talk about playing sword fighting and top the rock in school. Let we talk about how they would tie a stick on that tambourine tree and spin it, and who get catch had to come out. Let me talk about all these spaces in which we interact. Let's talk about wake night, bongo, and the cracking the kwakwa, and you had a dance between the bamboo and move your feet with great articulate skill. Let me talk about pong stone. Me, you know this one? Me calling we someone. And they pass the stone around and your hand there. And if you don't move your hand in time, where you go get?
Ow,
Okay.
ow.
Right? Or they used to call it passe kutla. They used to do the same thing with a sharp cutlass. These are all aspects historically known as the Kalinda complex. From limbo, bongo, bois, the romantic dances, they all were considered to be Kalindas or bambulas. The same complex in the Eastern Caribbean, in the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, was called bomba. In Dominican Republic, it's called palo. You know what palo means in Spanish? Stick. In Haiti, they used to call it mosundi or Kalinda. All throughout Curacao, Bonaire, they used to call them stick priests or Creole stick. We have to understand what we're dealing with. We're talking about from St. Louis, New Orleans Square, where they called it Kalinda, all the way to Argentina. This complex of technologies, of movement, of engaging in space, of developing competency, of conflict, of cooperation, it exists all throughout our space. When you talk about, yeah, she mouth like a foul, the two of them fighting like two foul. What's a gael? Gayeria. Gayo. References to fighting and coxes, references to Kalinda too. It's everywhere in the space, right? There was an interesting post on Instagram by Dominic Cadapasad. I love some of the historical stuff he pointed out. See, first ever recorded calypso, Congo Barra. But oops, Congo Barra is a lavway from Kalinda. Is it the first ever recorded calypso? Or is it the first lavway that was recorded with instruments as a calypso? So, we skipping out like, you know, it's like a party where you like the child, but you pretend like you ain't talking to the mother. Right? There's one of them scenes. So yeah, it everywhere. When I go to a football match in Intercal and I hear we want a rhythm section, pan, the whole thing is everywhere. The strange thing is how something could be everywhere and nowhere at the same time.
And with that in mind, I want to ask Jamie, what's the importance of persons with inside knowledge who are able to draw these links and connect these dots to actually archive the information, create content, tell own stories. So it's not as though somebody look at one part of the elephant and say, well, this is only there's a pillar. Look at another part and say, well, there's a rope. And they're not seeing the entire animal for what it is.
I think one of the things about, besides being a Bois woman, I'm an artist. So I understand where the artist would be inspired. Besides that, Kalinda is the type of technology that infuses your spirit. So whether you are a practitioner or not, if you are amongst the drums of Kalinda, you're amongst the voice of Kalinda, if you're hearing them sticks, the minute you come on a scene, you will feel its energy. So even if you go to say, I'm using the Kalinda to inspire this dance or this play or whatever the case may be, the energy will come because that is who she is. However, because you're not a practitioner, you may not understand that when the conflict reach, you will not know how to make it cooperate. You will not know how to make yourself and the person across from you more competent. You will not know how to bring it to the maximum point of creativity. So there will always be something that is lacking, something that has happened inside of the space because Kalinda has created so much of the space, calypso and so on, as Benji said. There is something that is missing for the layperson, if you will. They'll see certain parts of it. Most of the researchers that have written scholarship on Kalinda are not practitioners, but they have sat with practitioners. The thing about Kalinda is it has always been a secret society, still today, which is why you don't see the stick fighters in certain arenas.
I mean, what's the difference between, or some of the differences, because I'm not trying to drive straight down the rabbit hole, but a layperson and an initiate? What kind of process? Because I think sometimes when we hear initiate or initiation, we think we start to conjure all sorts of images and processes and...
We have the images that were placed inside of our head. So a lot of times when we think about initiation in this space, we think about Yoruba, we think about Orisha, we think about Ifa. That is one kind of initiation, which is another type of society inside of the space. Kalinda initiations, and I believe the same thing for Ifa as well. It is about becoming. That's what initiation means, yeah? So even if I go into a space of, for me particularly, my initiation was different from Benji's initiation. At the end of my initiation, when I finally stepped into a Gaia, I thought it was done. I said, that's it. 2-3 months later, another kind of initiation begun without somebody announcing that, oh yeah, you're in this initiation, all right? So there's no announcement of it. Because you are delegating certain things to yourself, you're operating inside of your, not individuality, but there is an instantiation of how you are practicing Kalinda. So each person's initiation or place of becoming can be different. I don't want to go into it because, again, Kalinda's secret societies.
And I get that. But with that and the last minute that we have, I want to ask, what is some of the work that the Academy is doing to further understanding, to further content, authoritative knowledge? And I ask you for that, please, Rondel.
Well, you use a word that make me feel squeamish, authoritative. The authorities and elders are the people in this space like King Tony Bainey, Gringo, Ronald Lewis. We have elders that we still go to in the ancestral plane. It's this constant process of becoming, as Jimmy quite correctly said. Bois Academy's work, initially was about becoming the culture, archiving, propagating, and then lifting up the elders. But then, with the advent of the new wave, I'll let Jimmy kind of lead where we go in with some of this, this new work we're doing.
I think it's really important because Kalinda to me is beyond being a martial tradition, it's an elite art form. So just like dance, visual arts, but Kalinda has all of it in one complex. So I give thanks for people like Tony Hall, who, when creating his Juve process, he was able to see a particular thing. And the work that he did, although I didn't even read it before I began creating a dance and performance technique that was rooted inside of Kalinda, it's completely aligned. But then there are pieces that Tony may not have seen, but the beautiful part about Tony is that he knew, which is why he brought Bois Academy in. And one of the things I was told is that he dreamt Bois Academy up. So for me, when I hear things like that, I know that Kalinda is speaking to certain people in this space, initiate or not. And it's all a matter if you're able to listen. So one of the things is the Philbert Kalinda technique for dance and performance, which is not just a dance technique in movement, but we work with allowing Kalinda to infuse, to uplift, to bring performing arts, visual arts, dance, writing, music, speech songs to another level. The technique allows for you to write anything, a thesis, a business plan, a poem. It is set in various different ways. So some of it is set up like a live way. And that sounds really simple, but it's not simple at all.
And I wish we had the time to actually expand a little more into that thesis, but I really want to thank you for taking the time. And one, taking time to speak with us, and two, taking time to lead us forward a little bit, expand consciousness with grace, as opposed to, I'm not necessarily sure about that word, I want to push back a little bit. Or how about you think about it in this way? And I appreciate it. And we want to thank you. This has been In Depth with me, Dike Rostant. We've been speaking with the Bois Academy of Trinidad and Tobago, Jamie Philbert, the Pointer, Rondel Benjamin, the Dreamer. We want to thank you so much for joining us.